Hi, I'm Brook Wilke. I'm at the Kellogg Biological Station out in our cereal rye variety trial, which is funded by the Michigan Craft Beverage Council. And we're nearing harvest here in our plot in southern Michigan. This plot is replicated at 3 sites across the state, so we can evaluate these varieties in the variety of Michigan climates. And we have 15 varieties out here where we're evaluating for agronomic quality and also grain quality, particularly focusing on how they would perform in a distillery and also in malt houses and breweries as well. And to add another layer to this project, we have 2 different management practices. One of which where we're applying growth regulators, which should help keep the rye shorter, and also fungicides, which would help protect the varieties from things that would, diseases that would affect the leaves and the grain quality. And so you can see that it's tall, it tends to fall over. Rye is known for that. And so managing it so that a farmer can grow it and harvest it well is really important so that they can deliver high quality seed. And you can also see that the varieties differ quite a bit in how tall they are and how they look at this stage. I want to point out a couple of different varieties that would be of interest and to highlight some of the differences that we have. So to the right here, we have a variety called Danko. It is a variety that was released in Poland in the 70s, and you can see it's standing really well. Right now it's about neck height on me, and it's all standing up real tall. It's going to be fairly easy to harvest. Danko is known for its winter hardiness and moderate to decent grain quality and yield characteristics. This is the first time we've grown it here, but I'm really impressed with how it looks at this point in its growth cycle. It's going to be harvestable. On my left is a variety called Merced. It's fairly typical of a lot of rye varieties, whereas they mature, they tend to fall over because they're so tall and they just can't support themselves anymore. This particular variety will still be able to harvest, but it's not going to be as easy, and we'll see. It's just we might lose some during the harvest process, and it's going to be more challenging for the harvest machine. So here I'm next to a hybrid rye variety called KWS Braceto, and for 10 to 15 years KWS company in particular has been breeding hybrid ryes, and the growth habit is quite a bit different than the open pollinated ryes. They tend to be shorter, and in most studies they yield quite a bit more. So there's more kernels, and they're pretty big kernels as well. And so you can see this variety here, it kind of looks similar to that Danko we looked at, but we suspect that it'll be higher yielding and really good quality as well. Now, if you're thinking about growing hybrid rye, you should know that you should expect to pay more for seed because there's more into the breeding process. And you also cannot save the seed for replanting because the genetics that will grow from the seeds that are produced from this variety won't grow back pure. They'll grow back with a wide range of genetics because of that hybridization that occurs during the breeding process. I also wanted to mention, as you can see kind of the diversity of rye in the background, that rye is one of the only cereal grains that we grow that is wind pollinated, which means that when we have a field like this with a bunch of varieties side by side, we can't expect to maintain genetic purity in any of these because there's going to be pollen floating around all over the place. And it's part of the difficulty in maintaining genetic purity of rye of any variety. You need to have significant isolation from other rye varieties to maintain that purity. And breeders and seed producers have learned that over time, that they have to be super vigilant about maintaining that distance to keep the varieties. And it also has led to some challenges in maintaining commercial diversity of varieties. We just don't have as many available varieties as we do in wheat and barley and other crops. Now I'm going to walk back here a little bit and talk about a different variety. It's one that, oh, hold on, I'll walk through here and you hear the cracking of the stems. So Behind me here, there's one that's standing, and it's really tall. And this one is actually a native Michigan variety. It was released by Michigan State back in the 70s, and it's called Wheeler. And it is produced and sold locally, and it's primarily marketed as a cover crop or forage rye, and you can see it's still standing really tall right now. There's some stems that still have some green in it. It seems to be the latest maturing of all the varieties that we have in this plot. We know that we're not going to get a great seed yield from it. That's not what it was bred for, but it does produce decent quality seed, and we know that distillers and brewers have used Wheeler rye in their craft beverage production in the past, and it tends to do a good job. Farmers should just not expect to get that much of it. However, it can be a dual purpose. Maybe you think you might use it for a cover crop, or maybe you'll keep it for harvest, so it can be a good variety to grow for that purpose. So I wanted to mention a little bit, if you haven't grown rye before, just some things to keep in mind when you're growing rye. And I'm standing in front of our border plots here, which happens to be a variety called AC Hazlitt. It comes from Canada. It's really winter hardy and a good dual purpose variety that can be used for grain, forage, or a cover crop. And a couple things to consider in general, when growing a typical variety, is that it gets really tall. And managing that can be a challenge. We've discussed to keep it upright and harvest, but you should also know that it's going to be slow and difficult to combine and harvest for seed, because there's a lot of material that needs to go through the combine in order to get the seed threshed. On the backside, the straw does have value from rye, so it seems like there should be a lot of straw, and there usually is quite a bit, but there's not as many stems per acre as a crop like wheat or barley, and so the overall yield isn't that much more for straw, but it does make really good straw, especially if you're looking for something with a long stem. Now, that height also gives us an advantage as a cover crop, which is something that rye is used for very commonly in Michigan, and it's also very winter hardy, so that gives us two very reliable characteristics that we want. It's also fairly easy to kill before the next crop. But something that's being used more and more in agronomic circles is using rye as a cover crop and waiting till it gets, waist high or so and starts flowering. And then it's either rolled down or it's planted right into, and then you have all this residue that helps act as a mulch layer between the crop rows and holds down weeds and can help retain moisture too once it's dead. And so part of what we're evaluating with this study is looking at these different varieties, thinking about how they would perform in a setting where we just want a cover crop, or maybe we want a forage crop before our next cash crop. And you can see how looking at the diversity, we could use that diversity to our advantage depending on how we want to integrate these varieties into our systems.
Hi, Ryan here again. This time I'm in the rye trial plot. I'd like to relate my experiences with rye in the malt house. In my time doing quality assurance assessments for incoming grain in the malt house, I handled a lot of barley and a lot of wheat, and my first test that I would do, which was make or break for the incoming load, was DON, deoxynivalenol, so the chief mycotoxin that we're testing for, produced by Fusarium head blight. And again, the threshold for acceptance was 1 part per million. If it was below a 0.5 part per million, even better, and that was preferred. Well, the highest DON concentration in any grain that I personally tested was actually rye. So I tested a sample that was 8 ppm, one that was a little bit below and in the 7s. So that's excessively high. And I can't really speak, I don't remember, I don't even know if it was discussed or not, whether it was sprayed with fungicide when it was in the field, or if it was, what the conditions were surrounding that application and how it was applied. But even in barleys that had come through my hands that may or may not have been treated with fungicide or were in less than optimal conditions, I never saw anything close to that as far as DON content. And from what I understand from research coming out of North Dakota State, with rye in the malting process is that it is very prone to promote the growth of fusarium in the malting process as well. So if you're going to be malting rye, you have to be very mindful of temperature control, moisture control. In addition to rye just not playing nicely in the malt house and brew house, it's very prone to fusarium growth. So it's something to be aware of in the malting process. For you maltsters out there, it's similar to malting wheat in the airflow issues that can occur, the heat issues that can occur during germination, but to a much higher level and much more prone to growing fusarium in the malt house versus wheat, which is much more prone to growing like bread mold kind of things, like black fungus. Steeping regimes in the malt house with rye, I would tend to go on the alkaline side of things, so boosting the pH of the steep water as high as possible. Actually kept biofilming down in the steeping process, and kept gels from forming in the germination process, at least in my experience. So it made it a little bit easier to handle. If you're a farmer and you're growing rye and you're looking to sell it to a malt house, you don't really have to be as diligent about protein levels as you would with barley necessarily. Brewers and maltsters expect rye to be problematic, so as long as you keep those DON levels down and keep those seeds viable, so your germinative capacity, germinative energy, and just viability as seeds, as long as your germination is close to 100% as possible and DON levels are low, you should see good acceptance in the malt house.